All right, it's that time. It's a Wednesday night. It's 8:30. It's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's the Panther-Lair Show. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. Ready for an hour or more or less, whatever it may be, of the best Pitt sports talk you're going to find right here on the Panther-Lair Show. We do it every Wednesday night. We get together for an hour or so, starting at 8:30 on Wednesday nights, breaking down everything that's been going on in the world of Pitt sports. We do it right here on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. I can't recommend that enough. I know I keep saying it, but I'm going to keep saying it. I'm not going to stop saying it because I want everyone to do it. I want to get those numbers up. I am nothing if not vain. And I like to see those numbers on YouTube go up. I like to see the likes on the videos go up. Certainly the views on the videos go up. And the subscriber numbers go up. So if you're watching these videos, if you enjoy the Panther-Lair Show or any of the other things we put out on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like the videos, share them, watch them, obviously, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's the key. That's what we definitely like to see. It's what we want to see. It means the most, and we definitely appreciate it. Of course, we've got a lot of content on the YouTube channel these days. We've been trying to bump that up a little bit more. We start the week off with the weekend recap show. That's on Monday mornings, where we just break down everything that happened over the weekend. Cherry picking a little bit to start this right in June, since we're doing a weekend recap right in the busiest month of the year, one of the busiest months of the year. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes in July and August. Certainly once we get into the season, there's going to be plenty to talk about on a weekly basis. And definitely right now in the month of June, there's plenty to talk about on a weekly basis. So we're going to do it now while it's easy and there's low-hanging fruit and plenty to talk about. And then once we get into July, it gets a little bit trickier. There's maybe not as much news over the weekend. Well, we'll see how the weekend recap show goes then. Maybe a little bit shorter. This past week, or 2 days ago as it were, the weekend recap show was almost like a half hour long. Well, maybe some weeks might only be 10, 11, 12 minutes. We'll see how that works out, but we're going to keep doing it. And we'll put the video out on the YouTube channel, on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then, we release it as a podcast as well if you want to just listen to it. But we certainly appreciate if you watch the video. So that comes out on Mondays. Wednesday nights, we have this show. We do the Panther-Lair Show every week, Wednesday nights at 8:30. And you can get in the live chat screen there. I guess it's over on this side of the screen. I'm backward here. But, you can get in the chat. You can ask your comments, or ask your questions, make your comments. And we can have a discussion about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. It's a little bit of back and forth, a little more than we usually get on this kind of show. It's like a talk show, and you can be the callers who offer your input or your insight or ask your questions. It's a chance to kind of get some instant reaction. And then on Fridays, last few weeks and next few weeks as well, we started publishing a conversation podcast. I haven't come up with a good name for it yet, but it's sort of the Panther-Lair conversation. We sit down, we interview someone for a little while. 2 weeks ago, we started off with Nelly Cummings, the transfer guard coming into Pitt from Colgate. I thought it was a really interesting interview with him. I hope you check that out. He talked about why he picked Pitt and kind of what he's bringing to the team and what he thinks of the chemistry of the team and what he, how he thinks this team could be better this year, why he's optimistic about Pitt's future. And I thought that was a really interesting conversation to hear. And then this past week, and this is one I really think you should check out if you're a Pitt basketball fan, we sat down with Jason Capel, the assistant basketball coach, who, has been a target for Pitt fans for probably a variety of reasons. And I think I probably have some ideas on why, on a few of those reasons, but he's been a target. He's been a lightning rod for Pitt fans. And so we sat down with him and talked to him. And I don't know if it changed your opinion about him, you changed your opinion about his role in this program or what he adds to the program or, his value to the program. But, I think it was interesting to get his insight. Just to hear from him directly, to hear from Jason Capel, Pitt assistant coach directly. And then also, the the things he said, not just him saying it, but the things he said I thought were really interesting about recruiting, state of recruiting, about transfers, just kind of the state of college basketball, certainly the state of the Pitt basketball program, and what he sees for the Panthers this year. So I thought that was really good. I was really happy with how that came out, and I really liked what Jason had to say. So hopefully you got a chance to check those out. We're going to keep doing those throughout the summer, have a Friday conversation, and we'll see where it goes. I got some good ones planned. I think they're good. Some interesting things planned coming up here that I think you're going to enjoy on those video conversation podcasts and interviews. So I hope you check it out. And again, if you want to make sure you don't miss any of these things, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you'll know every time we post a new video. You won't miss it. So you got to check that out. The news then. Let's move on because we do this weekly show. This is where we are right now, and this is kind of where it all started. Is this Wednesday night show. Used to be Tuesday nights, and maybe someday we'll move it back to Tuesday nights. But right now it's a Wednesday night show at 8:30 on our YouTube channel. It's a live Panther-Lair show. And we recap the news. You know what I mean? We talk about everything that's happened since last Wednesday. We look over the last week of news in Pitt sports. And to some extent, we kind of did that on Monday with the weekend recap. We kind of went through and broke down all the official visits. And we'll get to that again. We'll talk about those official visitors again and kind of what Pitt got and how I think they fit in and what it all means and all that kind of thing. And then there was news that's come up since then. News in the last, today actually, here on Wednesday. And we'll talk about that as Pitt got a transfer quarterback to commit. They had two transfers on campus this week, a quarterback and a running back. They got the quarterback to commit. We'll see where things stand with the running back. And so we're going to talk about that. I think that's really interesting. There's more prospect camps coming up next weekend. There's more official visits coming up the weekend after that. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, but I'm going to start. And before we even get into comments and questions, I'm going to talk about this kind of a broad umbrella topic. And I'm going to get to your comments and your questions, and we'll go from there. Broadly, there's a hell of a lot of momentum with this Pitt football program right now. A whole lot. And it comes from sort of most directly the success they had last season. And everything along with that success, the 11-win season, the ACC championship, the New Year's Six Bowl, the Heisman Trophy finalist, the Biletnikoff Award winner, a fair amount of hype heading into this year. That season is the genesis of the momentum they have right now. And it's aided, of course, by all the other things that have sort of existed with this program. The stability that Pat Narduzzi has brought to it, a pretty good recruiting staff, all the things the university has to offer, the life skills program, the facilities, all those things. But most directly, most acutely, it's the success of last season, and it's created a ton of momentum for this program. And I think you feel it and you see it in a lot of different ways. And certainly a successful official visit weekend is one of them. And Pitt had 14 total official visitors come in over the weekend. 2 of those guys were already committed, so set those guys aside. The other 12, they got commitments from 6 of them. I think of the 6 guys they didn't get commitments from, at least one they probably wouldn't have taken a commitment from. The other 5 still kind of going through the process. One guy's committed to another school. A couple other guys have more visits they want to take. They want to experience the recruiting process. But getting 6 out of 12 is a pretty good start. And 6 priority targets. 6 guys with options. And sometimes I almost wonder if it's a weird... It's not damning with faint praise. But it's almost, I almost sometimes wonder if it's a weird way to put it to say, well, this guy had options. But I think that's relevant. You know what I mean? I think you want your school and your team to get kids who have options. Kids who have the option to go to another very good school. Kids who have an option to go to another school where the football team has been successful recently, where they have stability with their head coach, where they have, a history and all these different things. You want you want the players who choose your favorite team to have those options and say, Pitt's the best one for me. That's what you want. And that's what they got. That's what they got in these 6 kids who committed over the weekend. Now, success on an official visit weekend is nothing new. we've come to expect it. Particularly these June official visit weekends, going back to the summer of 2018. The first year they had June official visit weekends, they killed it. It was Father's Day weekend. And I can remember it as clear as day. I remember very clearly where the rest of my family was, and they were off at a Father's Day picnic with my brothers-in-law and nieces and nephews and all this stuff. And my family was there too, while I sat right here. Was it here? I moved in the spring of 2019, so it was my last house, and I sat there and worked for most of Father's Day because they just kept getting commitments, and commitments kept rolling in, and the news kept breaking. And that's what June has been, other than June of 2020, when there were no visits whatsoever, but June of 2018, June of 2019, and June of 2021, and now June of 2022, it's all been the same. So it's not a surprise to get commitments during an official visit weekend. But when you look at the recruits they got, and the fact that in 2022, the situation's a little different. Because I don't know. I had doubts heading into the official visit weekend. I had doubts about how many commitments they would get. Because this year, I wondered, given where we are in the state of college football right now, college athletics, I wondered if there might be fewer commitments on official visits, at least the early official visits, early in June official visits, first weekend, second weekend official visits, if there'd be fewer commitments than what we've seen in the past. Because, and I can't think of a more sort of tactful way of saying this, but just to be as blunt as possible, I thought there would be fewer commitments because kids would be shopping around. That's the world we're in right now. And not every school makes NIL deals a focus of the official visit weekends and a focus of the recruiting process. There are a lot of schools, maybe the majority of schools is my guess, do not bring that up and do not make that a point of focus and are not highlighting that on official visit weekends. But some schools are. And some schools are making it part of the recruiting process. I'm fairly convinced about this. And it may happen with intermediaries and third parties, and it may just be the coach straight out saying it. That we can do this for you. We can get you this. And I think because of that sort of shaping the environment of college football and shaping the atmosphere of the recruiting process right now in a lot of different places, I thought we might see fewer commitments on these early official visit weekends because these kids would shop around, would go around and see what kind of NIL deals they could get. Now, I think Pitt is one of the schools that is at least attempting to stay above board on this, trying not to make NIL promises to recruits, trying not to make NIL deals part of the recruiting process as much as they can. And I don't think Pitt is alone. I'm not going to claim they're some sort of white knight or they're riding off, to fight this. They're not Gary Cooper and High Noon or something, going off alone. That was a bad reference, because that's just not exactly what happened. But sort of. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. I think there are a lot of schools that are trying to do this above board. I think there are a lot of schools that are trying to make this so that, okay, you get on campus, and if you can get a sponsorship deal, great. We're not going to facilitate that. We're not going to sell you on that. We're not going to use that to recruit you. I think there are a lot of schools that are trying to walk that line, but there are a lot of schools that aren't. And there are a lot of schools that are making it part of the recruiting process. And there are a lot of schools that are getting kids with promises of straight cash, homie. And because of all that, and then word gets around, right? Word gets around. You hear, one recruit hears from another recruit, hey, did you hear so-and-so is going to get $200,000 to go there? Right? And that starts getting around. You say, well, what can I get? And then word starts getting around. Hey, this guy's getting $200,000 from this school. Hey, this school's giving $200,000 to this guy. Hey, this school's going to give you like $50,000 a year. Hey, this school's going to do this. This school's going to do that. And then you end up with recruits going to visits, unofficial or official visits, and sitting down with coaches and saying, well, coach, what am I going to be able to get here? And some coaches are, they can't be surprised by these questions anymore. But I think some coaches are sitting back and saying, I'm not having this conversation with you. I can't be a part of that. And some coaches are saying, well, here's what we can do. And so it's a very interesting time, as we all know. And I mean, we all saw it firsthand, right, with the Jordan Addison situation and transfer to USC. But it's a very interesting time how that is filtered into the recruiting process and how it's affecting the recruiting process heading into June. And so because of that, I thought there might be fewer commitments because I thought, guys would test drive a few different schools and see what they were going to get. All that being said, for Pitt to then come out of this official visit weekend, basically batting 500 on the recruits who visited, and really could go a little bit higher on the percentage-wise if you consider, well, maybe this guy couldn't commit or maybe that guy couldn't commit. That's really strong. And it speaks to the momentum this football program has right now. With the success that they had last season, sort of acting as, I don't want to say the missing piece because they've had success, but if you look at all the pieces that Pat Narduzzi has in this program right now and is built into this program right now, he's got a lot of it put together. The one thing, if anything was missing, it was that real breakthrough season, that real high level of success where you're pretty much at, or if you're not at the highest level of college football, if you're not in that number one tier, you're as close as you can get without breaking into it. And that was kind of that one thing that they hadn't had yet. And they were able to recruit like crazy off just winning the Coastal in 2018, even though they went 7-7 that year. To not only win the Coastal, but to win 10 games in the regular season, to win the ACC championship, to finish with 11 wins and a top 15 ranking. I mean, they hit the nitrous button. They hit the nitrous button on their recruiting efforts because they had all the other pieces in place. All the other pieces were there, and then that success put it to the moon in the parlance of our times. And the result is a really successful official visit weekend that they followed with, and I talked about this on the Monday weekend recap show, that they followed with on Sunday with a prospect camp. And the prospect camps, anybody can come. High school kids, rising freshman, sophomore, junior, senior can come. You pay $65 or whatever it is, and you spend the afternoon. I mean, you get to Pitt, you spend 2 hours testing, measuring in and all that stuff, and then you go through like 3 hours of drills with the Pitt coaches. And I've been going to these camps, and I've been covering these camps for 17 years. And I've seen a lot of kids roll through there. And there's some years where the camps are smaller, there's some years where the camps are bigger. And for the most part, you're not going to find a lot of Power 5 guys there. You might get a handful at each camp. And that was the case again on Sunday. There was just a handful. But what was abnormal on Sunday, what was atypical, what stood out maybe the most, there was more than 500 kids in the South Side for Pitt's camp on Sunday. I've seen some big camps. Last year, after not being able to hold prospect camps in 2020, after recruits not being able to go to prospect camps in 2020, last year had some giant camps. They pushed 400 in these camps. And we all stood around and said, this is insane. I've never seen anything like this. I can't believe they've got almost 400 kids here. This is crazy. This is the biggest camp I've ever seen. They topped 500 on Sunday. And there are a lot of reasons why that happened. But the success of the football program, the success of the football team last year, and the momentum around the football program are a big part of it. I was standing on the sidelines during one of the drills, 7-on-7 or something, on Sunday, standing at the South Side facility. We're outside. I'm talking to somebody. It might have been Alex Christo, our recruiting analyst at Panther-Lair.com. He was down there. I forget, I was talking to him or someone else, and we were talking about just the size of it. I said, this is insane. This is insane that there are 500 kids out here. I can't believe it. I've never seen this before. And a guy walks up to me and goes, that's what happens when you win the ACC. And this guy ended up he was the father of a quarterback prospect that Pitt is very high on in the 2025 recruiting class. So a guy who just finished his freshman year of high school, and Pitt has offered him, basically showing a lot of interest in this kid, and the kid looks really good. He was working out at the camp. He was great. He made the trip all the way up from Tennessee to take part in Pitt's prospect camps, to be around the Pitt football program, to be coached by the Pitt football coaches. Because Pitt's program is relevant right now. It's prominent right now. It's synonymous with success. It's known as a successful program. Kenny Minchie, the quarterback recruit who's committed to Pitt for the class of 2023, took his official visit last weekend. I interviewed him. We were talking about this, talking about that. He was a new offer. He committed at the end of April, but he had just gotten his offer in February, shortly after Frank Signetti and the assistant, the offensive coordinator and the assistant quarterbacks coach Jonathan DiBiaso. After those guys were hired, Minchie was one of the new quarterback targets that they went after because Mark Whipple really didn't target anybody. And so they offered this kid. And it was, like two and a half month turnaround from the time he got his offer to the time he committed. And so I interviewed him after his official visit, and we're talking. And I'm like, well, was Pitt even really on your radar before you got that offer? And he said, oh, yeah. I watched them all year. I watched all the success they had all season. And I remember I always thought, he's like, I never heard from them. They never recruited me. He's a kid in Tennessee. It's not really normal recruiting ground for Pitt. And their offensive coordinator was Mark Whipple, who didn't recruit very much. So it's not that strange that he never heard from them. But while Pitt didn't really have any interest in him, he had a lot of interest in Pitt. And even said, you get into December and January, before he even heard from Pitt, he always thought, man, Pitt would be a school I'd like to go to. That's the kind of place I want to be. That's the kind of team I want to play for. That's the kind of success I want to have. And that struck me, and so I've got that, and then right along with this prospect camp that's enormous with 500 kids saying, I want to be coached by the coaches who led their team to an 11-win season, an ACC championship, and a Peach Bowl. I want to be around a program that's successful. I want to come down there. I want to practice on the same field. I want to do drills and work out on the same field, that the Steelers work out on, and also the same field that Pitt works out on. The same field that the ACC champs work out on. The same field that an 11-win team practices on. And I want to be coached by the guys who coach that 11-win team. And that was the biggest thing I walked out of the Southside with on Sunday afternoon. I just remember thinking to myself, that guy, that quarterback's dad who was talking to me, he's right. This is what happens when you win the ACC. This is what happens when you are successful like that. You become a destination. You get 6 guys to commit, and all 6 of them had more official visits planned for later in June. You get some really impressive prospects to take their official visits. You get the number 50 overall player in the class of 2024 to come up from Texas on an unofficial visit, paying his own way, paying his airfare, paying his hotel, paying his food, and all that stuff, because he wants to see what this program is all about. He wants to be around Pitt. That's a pretty remarkable place for Pitt to be in right now. It's real momentum with the football program. All right, let's check out what everybody's talking about, see what the comments and questions are happening here. Coaster King says, why does there seem to be some struggles with O-line recruiting this cycle when every other position seems to be on the upward trend? Yeah, the O-line recruiting is kind of interesting right now. They had a big-time offensive line prospect on campus for an official visit this past weekend. They did a really good job with him and impressed him. But he's going to take more visits. We'll see. They've got a few more. There was one offensive line prospect who was at the prospect camp on Sunday. He ended up getting an offer and scheduled an official visit for next weekend. They've got one of their top targets, a kid from Florida, coming in late in the month. They've got maybe 2 more, I think. So you're looking at 5 or 6 official visitors. Maybe not the traction that certainly not what you would want to see. You would like to see a little bit more interest, given all the success they had offensively this past season, the success of the offensive line this past season. You would like to see that pick up a little bit more. I think it's tough to get those big-time top offensive line recruits on a consistent basis because there just aren't many of them, and there's such a high priority placed on those guys who can come in and be ready to play in year 2. That even though you had a really successful season, those guys are still in such high demand that it's hard to get them. I think that might be part of it. But I'll be interested to see what kind of class they end up with of offensive linemen because there's not really a clear picture right now. So I don't really have a good answer for you, Coaster King, on why that is. Michael B is a super chatter, and we definitely appreciate that. You can be a super chatter too if you want to contribute a few dollars to the podcast, show a little support. We definitely, I can't say thank you enough for that. Michael B says, Chris, no questions. Enjoy the support. I love donating to you in the podcast. Hey man, I appreciate you, very much. You can click that little dollar sign down at the bottom like Michael B did and contribute. We definitely big thanks for that. General So's Chicken says, what's your prediction for Pitt's first 3 games versus West Virginia, Tennessee, Western Michigan? 3-0. General So's Chicken says 3-0. What do I think? I mean, I haven't looked closely enough. I mean, I've sort of looked a little bit at West Virginia, looked a little bit at Tennessee, not looked as much at Western Michigan, but I think we know some of the key players they had are no longer there. Caleb Ellaby is gone. Sky Moore is gone. And I think that makes all the difference. Now, the scheme is still there. The tape is still there. The success they had running the same things against Pitt is still there. And you would think that, it's possible some of the vulnerabilities are still going to be there. But I do think you need the athletes to pull it off. And while they're going to be walking into a hornet's nest of a primetime road game at Western Michigan that Saturday, I'm not going to pick Pitt to lose that game. I'll go in on the West Virginia game too. I'll say Pitt opens the season not without its rust, but I think West Virginia will have rust too, and I think it'll be a sloppy game. This is my June 8th prediction. I'm going to change this like 18 times between now and the game. I think it'll be a sloppy game. I don't think it's going to be anything where anybody walks out of there saying, "Oh my goodness, we're on the verge of going 12-0." I could see it being the kind of game that Pitt fans walk out and say, "You better clean that stuff up, or else you're going to lose to Tennessee." You know what I mean? I could see us doing a post-game show that night. God, that's going to be a late one. I don't know if we'll do a post-game show after the West Virginia game when it's a night game there on a Thursday. But if we did a post-game show, I'll probably get my phone and record a drive home podcast that night, and I can envision myself saying, "You got the win, but you better clean a bunch of stuff up because that's not going to hold up against Tennessee. You're going to lose against Tennessee if you make these same mistakes." And then, the Tennessee game will come down to how much they're able to clean up after the West Virginia game. And if they clean it up, then they'll have a shot. And if they don't clean it up, then they won't. So 2-1 at a minimum, 3-0 possible is what my prediction would be, I guess. Josh Newark says, Chris, I live in the heart of knitter country. To have Taekwon Underwood grab a Dallastown kid is a feat. If you had to choose, is it more of Underwood's relationship or the Pitt ACC championship as opposed to Penn State going 500 the past 2 years? So the Dallastown kid that Josh Newark is talking about, Kenny Johnson, wide receiver from Dallastown High School in York, Pennsylvania. Our guy Matt Hawley, photographer, pointed out, and I didn't make this connection, but that was the same high school that Ben Klein went to. Do you remember Ben Klein, class of 2011? He was a linebacker who committed to Pitt in the summer of 2010. So, heading into his senior year, he was part of the big commitment push, probably in June, actually, where Dave Wanstead and his staff built on the 10-3 season in 2009. This thing we always talk about, all the success that kind of follows a season, where your next year's recruiting class ends up really being the one that reaps the rewards. And so Ben Klein committed to Pitt that summer, but I think we always knew Penn State was sort of lurking there as a possibility. And I think he was probably on the verge of flipping even before Dave Wanstead got fired. And once Wanstead got fired, I think Ben Klein might have been the first kid to say, okay, I'm out. A lot of those guys stuck with it. A lot of those guys didn't decommit. A lot of those guys said, all right, we'll see it out. Let's see what happens. And Michael Haywood got hired, and they stuck with it. There were 2 or 3 who decommitted. Ben Klein was one. I forget. I think there was 1 or 2 others. Quentin Alston, maybe. Oh, I think he even stood with it. I think most of those guys were pretty solid, and they were willing to give Michael Haywood a chance. You know what I mean? They were willing to stick with it through Michael Haywood. But then when Haywood got fired, that was, got arrested and got fired, that severed the ties on everybody. That was the end of it. And we know how that all worked out. But Ben Klein was a guy who probably was going to decommit anyway. And Wanstead's firing just sort of made it easy for him. He ended up at Penn State, and as Matt Hawley, like I say, our photographer, pointed out, he was a guy who got famous because he would go around and headbutt his teammates before the game to get them fired up. And he would do it without wearing a helmet. His teammates would be having helmets on. He would not. He'd get all bloody on his forehead. A bit of a maniac move, but hey, good for Ben Klein. Anyway, Ben Klein was like seemingly one of the last D1 kids to come out of Dallastown, or at least Power 5 or FBS kids come out of Dallastown. And now Kenny Johnson. And Kenny Johnson from Dallastown High School in York, Pennsylvania, was expected to be a Penn State lean. It was thought that, of course, he's going to Penn State. That's where he, that's what everybody expected, is that he would end up there. And he had an official visit scheduled to Penn State for the end of the month. But Pitt was his first official visit, and the Panthers pulled it off. I think there are several factors that go into it to answer Josh's question. I don't think Penn State's record the past 2 years was as big of a factor, probably as, not as big of a factor as Pitt's record last season was, probably not as big of a factor as his connection with Taekwon Underwood, and not as big of a factor as just what they were able to pull off on the official visit. I had heard going into the official visit that Pitt had a better chance than probably a lot of people were giving them credit for. But I think the official visit obviously sealed the deal. Josh Newark, another question, says, does Pitt getting another quarterback transfer mean Pitt is losing a quarterback from the current roster? All right, so that's news we didn't get into. Let's talk about this real quick. Derek Kyler, quarterback from Dartmouth, originally from Illinois, is committed to Pitt as a grad transfer. He announced it on Wednesday, took his official visit Monday to Wednesday, announced his commitment on Wednesday, and he's coming in with 1 year left to play after spending 5 years at Dartmouth. They had the COVID season that got canceled. He had a pretty remarkable career at Dartmouth. Not a ton of volume. Tremendous efficiency, though. 42 touchdowns and 6 interceptions over the course of his career. He was a finalist for it's not the Ivy League Heisman, but it's like, most outstanding player in his final year of eligibility or something like that. Led Dartmouth to an Ivy League championship, and was, regularly recognized as one of the best players in the Ivy League. And just, like I say, a super efficient, very experienced quarterback who, from what I can gather, he went into the transfer portal in December, got a bunch of offers from like Samford and New Mexico and maybe UMass, and then decided, I'm going to go into the business world. I'm going to move on with my life's work. He was really going to move on with his life's work. But then decided to go back into the transfer portal. We haven't gotten the full story from Derek Kyler yet. I hope to talk to him. Thought I might talk to him before we started this live stream. I hope to talk to him soon. Maybe try and call him again after this thing. Decided to go back into the transfer portal. Took a visit to Pitt. Liked it, and committed. What does it mean? I mean, to Josh's question, why did they take another quarterback? Why did they add another quarterback to the roster? I don't think it means Pitt is losing a quarterback. I think it means that Pitt has basically 2 quarterbacks right now. They have 3 scholarship quarterbacks. They have Keaton Slovis, they have Nick Patty, and they have Nate Yarnell. But Nate Yarnell has been hurt since last season. I think the report is that it's a Liz Frank injury, which takes time. And I think, Pitt is looking at it as there are a couple factors. One, I think they feel very good about their top 2 guys. I think they feel very good about Keaton Slovis and Nick Patty. But the thing is, when you get beyond them, what do you have? You have a redshirt freshman who's never played and is coming off an injury, and you don't know when he's going to be 100% cleared, and then you have walk-ons. So you bring in Derek Kyler, and I don't know if you're telling a guy you're bringing him in to be the number 3 quarterback. I don't know what they're telling him. But you bring in a guy like Derek Kyler, he's got experience, and he's really efficient. He protects the ball. He doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't throw turnovers. Doesn't throw interceptions or create turnovers. And so even if he just ends up being your number 3, right? Think about the Peach Bowl. Think about the Peach Bowl. You get into a situation like that where you lose Keaton Slovis and you got to go with Nick Patty. Nick Patty gets hurt on the second drive of the game and he's out, and you have to go with your next guy. It could be, I mean, Davis Bevel had no substantial or significant experience at all. He played a handful of times and hadn't really done much, and he looked like it when he was playing out there. So you could go with the equivalent of that, which would be Nate Yarnell, who has not played at all, and again is coming off an injury. Or you could go with a guy who's played a ton of football in the Ivy League. He's smart, he's efficient, he doesn't make mistakes. He's going to pick up the offense, and I think you can trust him, maybe not to win you games, but at least to not lose you games. Then that renewed emphasis on the running game becomes all the more valuable. So I think that's my thought, and I haven't consulted with sources on this or anything. This is my read on the situation, is that it's insurance. And they've got the scholarship spots. Before Derek Kyler committed, before you put him on the scholarship board, they had 3 open scholarship spots. Now they still have 2 more spots left. So they took effectively a number 3 quarterback with a ton of experience who's very efficient, and they still have more scholarship spots that they can use. So I think it was a situation where they looked at it and said, hey, somebody probably saw this kid went into the transfer portal, showed up and said, this guy was really a really good player in the Ivy League. He doesn't throw a lot of interceptions. He threw a lot of touchdowns, 42 touchdowns to 6 picks. This might be worth a look. Let's see if we can get him on campus and see if it's a good fit. We've got 3 spots to use. And so they did. And so that's kind of what I read into it, Josh, as far as adding the quarterback transfer. We'll see what his role ends up being and what the sales pitch was to him, but that's kind of how I read into it. Talk is Pitt says, I think people only focus on what we lost. Oh, screen jump. Hold on. I think people only focus on what we lost and assume we will fall off, but I think we are more talented this time around. I still think 10 wins is possible. So there are different ways to evaluate the talent of a team, particularly if you're going to compare a team from one year to the next. I think you can talk about overall talent, and I think you can talk about kind of that top-end talent. I think overall, maybe this team is deeper and more talented overall. But the problem is that Kenny Pickett was so far and above, and Jordan Addison was so far and above, that even if this year's team is deeper, even if this year's team might be more talented overall, it's hard to it's hard to say that they're better. The expectations are higher this year when you lost a Heisman Trophy finalist and a Biletnikoff Award winner. And look, I have a lot of confidence. I think Keaton Slovis is going to be really good. I like this receiver group a lot. You guys know that. I've talked about it a million times. If you listen to this podcast, you read Panther-Lair.com, you read the 321 column, any of those things that we do, any chance that I've had to say it, I've said that I really like the receiver group. But they don't have Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison was a special player. Kenny Pickett was a special player. And when you take those 2 guys out, it gets tough. Now, that's not to say that they can't accomplish more this season than they did last year. That's not to say that they can't win more this year than they did last year. It's not to say that you shouldn't have that expectation that 10 wins, like Talkis Pitt says, I still think 10 wins is possible. I think it's perfectly reasonable to go into this season expecting Pitt to win 10 games. And saying that less than 10, barring the circumstances, is something of a disappointment. I think that's perfectly reasonable, given what they've got back, the whole talent, the talent of the whole team, even including some of those question mark spots like quarterback and maybe wide receiver, outside linebacker. I think it's reasonable to expect this team to compete for and or win the Coastal, and I think it's reasonable to expect this team to compete for and or win the ACC. It's tough to say that the team is more talented when you lose those 2 guys, though. So it's kind of like, it's a little bit of both, and it depends on how you want to evaluate the talent and compare the talent of one team to the next. Brock Madonic asks, is Colby Young no longer an option? Do you still see Pitt trying to add another receiver to this year's roster, whether it's Young or not? So Colby Young was an interesting guy, Binghamton native, who was doing a year, some time at, not doing some time, it's a terrible way to phrase it, who was studying at Lackawanna College, junior college outside of Scranton. And really intriguing wide receiver prospect, big, and you watch his film and he's just towering over everybody. He's using his size to make plays and really would have size that Pitt doesn't have. Pitt's got some size. Pitt's got some bigger receivers. Jared Wayne has decent size. Jaden Bradley's pretty big. Bub Means coming in has good size. But Colby Young would tower over those guys. and be able to use his size as a downfield threat. It looked like a really good piece, and they were going to bring him in for an official visit, supposed to be starting yesterday on Tuesday, go Tuesday to Thursday. But the problem with Colby Young, and the problem that Pitt runs into a lot of times with junior college players, is getting credits to transfer. Some do, some don't. Different schools have different standards, different schools have different requirements, different schools will accept different credits, and different credits will transfer. This isn't Pitt's such a good school, but Pitt does have high academic standards. The running joke among people my age, I'm 43, and the running joke among people my age who went to Pitt is, well, we wouldn't be able to go to Pitt today. Like friends of mine that I went to school with, when we talk about Pitt, or we talk about this or that, we say, I wouldn't be able to get into Pitt today. And I think that's true. I think the academic standards have risen, and there are always ways to make exceptions on, for athletics. I mean, I think there are always going to be exceptions made there, and ways that you find to get guys into school. But at the end of the day, you got to meet the requirements that are required, right? And so I think it was a situation where Colby Young knew he even knew, if you read the article we put out, or some of the stuff that we put out last week when we first started reporting on Colby Young, he knew that he wouldn't be able to get into Pitt right away, that he was going to have to do some extra work to get the necessary credits. Whereas Tennessee and Arkansas State didn't have those same level of requirements. They would accept the credits. And so he knew it was going to be a bit of a challenge. And I think by the time he got through the weekend, Colby Young and Pitt both kind of agreed that they weren't going to be able to make it work. And so, I think he's still visiting Tennessee. And, I would presume that's where he ends up, but we'll see. But yeah, that's not going to happen. As for, will Pitt add more? Will Pitt add? Sorry, get distracted by your comments and questions sometimes. Will Pitt add more receivers to the 2022 roster? I don't know. I think it kind of like with Derek Kyler, kind of like Sebo Flemister, the Notre Dame running back who took an official visit this week. Didn't commit, but he liked the visit. I think it's a case where if they find a guy who they think can help them, there's open spots. They've still got 2 more open scholarship spots. And so I think they could look for one if they find the right guy. Brock Madonic says, out of the 6 recruits who committed over the weekend, who is flying under the radar that isn't being talked about that should be? I mean, take your pick. So that's a tough question for me, Brock. People ask me that sometimes, like, who's the under the radar? Who do Pitt fans need to talk about more? And sometimes there'll be something that comes to mind. But for me, we had the Panther-Lair Show last Wednesday. We had the weekend recap show on Monday. And obviously I've been writing a ton of stuff and tweeting and all that. I feel like I've talked about all the guys a ton. You know what I mean? I talked about Kenny Johnson, the receiver prospect who seemed like a lock to go to Penn State. I've talked about Shadarian Harrison, the defensive back out of Florida, who's got the 6'6" or 6'7" wingspan and is somehow under the radar, even though he's got 20 offers. But that's just how much talent there is in Florida. I've talked about Isaiah Neal, the defensive tackle, who's like a perfect fit for Pitt's defense. I've talked about Antonio Camon, who is a defensive end, a pass rusher that I think is really good off the edge. I've talked about Bryce Pollock and Shelton Lewis, the 2 defensive backs they got out of Georgia. I've talked about these guys a ton. And so it's hard for me to say, here's the guy that we need to talk about more. I think Bryce Pollock is really good. I think Shadarian Harrison is really good. I think Isaiah Neal is going to fit in really well with this defense. It's hard for me to pick a guy that isn't being talked about enough. You need to find other Pitt sports talk shows that only occasionally talk about recruiting. Find Pittsburgh sports talk shows that don't really talk about recruiting much, and see which guys they're talking about. And then whichever ones they're not talking about are the ones that we should say are not getting talked about enough. Josh Newark asks, speaking of NIL, how close to the truth do you think it is about Ohio State coach Ryan Day saying he needs $13 million in NIL money to be competitive? I can't figure out what these coaches are trying to do. Ryan Day said that. James Franklin had some comment about, we it's even more than what you're hearing or something like that about how much money they need. I don't know what, it's one thing when Nick Saban, even Nick Saban is doing it too, actually. I can't tell if these guys are trying to call each other out or rile up their donor bases and their booster bases to get with the program and start ponying up cash. I think it's the second one. I think they're using the media and speaking through the media to try and get their boosters to put more money up so they can get the good recruits and they can get the good transfers. I honestly think that's what it is. I think if you read some of James Franklin's comments this week, I think that's what he's doing. I think that's what he's saying. He feels like Penn State fans and Penn State boosters aren't stepping up enough. And so it's making it harder for Penn State to compete on the recruiting trail and with transfers when, because there's not enough money being put up there. I think that's what these guys are saying. I think that's what Ryan Day is saying. I think Nick Saban tried to give a rallying speech to the Alabama boosters. I have to think that if you just pull these guys into an office, if you just called a meeting of top boosters, you could probably be more effective than what you're doing in the press. But it sounds like they're begging. These guys aren't too proud to beg. Let's see here. Christian Cosmac says, Tennessee worries me more than anyone on the schedule other than Miami. Those two games could be the determining factor in being a playoff team or going 10-2. Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with you about that, Christian. I mean, I think Tennessee is going to be a real challenge. I think Tennessee was a real challenge for Pitt last year. And I don't see a reason why that wouldn't be the case again this year. I think they're going to be better than they were a year ago. And Miami as well. I mean, it's going to be a case in both of those where you're going to face pretty good quarterbacks. And you're going to have to show that you're capable of either slowing those quarterbacks down, forcing a crucial mistake, or scoring enough to keep up with them. And, last year, I think they were able to force the crucial mistakes or get lucky to get the crucial mistakes in the Tennessee game. And they came out with a win. The Miami game, truth is, Pitt made the crucial mistake. Kenny Pickett threw 2 bad interceptions, as I recall. And that was ultimately the difference in the game. There were a lot of different things you could point to. You could talk about really poor tackling in the first quarter on screen passes that got way more yards than they ever should have. You could talk about the safety that wasn't. And as I've pointed out, more relevantly, the play after the safety that wasn't, where you had another chance to stop them and you end up giving up like a 9-yard gain. You could talk about all those things, but the interceptions, the mistakes. So those two teams, that when you're facing Hendon Hooker and Tyler Van Dyke, whatever you want to say about either guy, and I think Pitt fans probably have, don't have a lot of respect for Hendon Hooker, but he looked pretty good against Pitt last year. You either need to slow those guys down, force a crucial mistake, or hang with them and outplay them and outscore them. And I'm not ready just yet to say that Pitt's going to be the kind of team that can outscore opponents like they were last year. That's what they were last year. They were a team that could, if they needed to score 50, they could do it on most occasions, and they did it on a lot of occasions. I'm not ready to say that this year's Pitt team is that just yet because we haven't seen them yet. So I could get on board with saying that Tennessee and Miami are the scariest teams. I think they probably have the best quarterbacks on the schedule that Pitt's going to face. I think Malik Cunningham is pretty good at Louisville, but I would say Van Dyke and Hooker are the two biggest ones to be worried about. So, yeah, I could get on board with that. Coaster King says, how many commits do you think they get from the next slate of official visits, and who in particular do you have your eye on to commit? Coaster King, so they don't have official visits this coming weekend, which would be like the 10th through the 12th. Their next set of visits will be the following week, 16th through the 18th, Thursday to Saturday again. And honestly, that list is still coming into focus of who's going to be visiting. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. Let me bring up the official visit list real quick and see who's scheduled to come in next on that next visit. Okay, so there's a handful of guys in here I would be keeping an eye on. Jordan Bass is a really interesting one, a linebacker from Virginia. I would watch out for him. They'll have a 4-star prospect, Braden Marshall, a cornerback. think he's from Florida. Khalil Ali, a defensive back from New Jersey, is one to keep an eye on. I think Rasheem Biles, another defensive back. I think he's a defensive back. He might project as an outside linebacker from Ohio, is one to keep an eye on. So there are a few in that group, and I think more names will be added, and the list will keep getting more and more interesting. And we'll get a better idea of who to watch for as the weekend approaches. But again, that's 2 weeks from now. So that's not this weekend. No official visits this weekend. 2 days of prospect camps, Saturday and Sunday. No official visits. None until the following week. Josh Newark says, West Virginia is at 7 p.m. I need a post-game podcast for the drive home. That's going to be tough, Josh. I mean, the home games particularly. Game kicks off at 7. I usually don't expect to leave the stadium until about 6 hours after the game. So 6 hours after the game starts. So you're looking at probably not getting out of the stadium before midnight. So till I get home and kind of get settled, I don't think I'm doing a live stream at 1:30 in the morning. I'll do late live streams. I'll do 11:30 live stream, 11 o'clock live stream. I might even do a midnight live stream if we need to, if the situation calls for it. I don't think we're doing one at 1 in the morning. That's just not going to be able to happen. Sorry. But we'll see what we can do. Let's see here. Let's scroll. Royce Beacom says, is the transfer quarterback an insurance policy by Pat Narduzzi for when he announces the number 1 quarterback and then the number 2 quarterback transfers? I don't think so. Honestly, Royce, I don't think so for a couple reasons. I mean, yeah, sure. If that scenario unfolds and one of these guys decides to transfer, then sure. I mean, it is an insurance policy. It gives you a legit, a solid backup, in case one of your guys decides to leave. Keaton Slovis isn't going anywhere. He's already transferred once, and I think he would have to sit. I don't think he graduated at USC, so he would have to sit out a year if he decided to transfer, and he's not going to do that. And if Keaton Slovis wins the job, I don't know if I see Nick Patty going, because Nick Patty, if he has graduated, he could transfer and play right away. If he has not graduated, he would not be able to play right away, because if you want to play right away, if you want that one-time free transfer, you have to be in the transfer portal by May 1st. That's the deadline. You have to submit your paperwork by May 1st, and he has not done that. As a matter of fact, Nick Patty was working at Pitt's prospect camp on Sunday. He was working with the quarterbacks, with Keaton Slovis. So I don't know if I necessarily see that happening. I think if he doesn't win the starting job, he'll be disappointed, but I don't necessarily see him taking off. So, I don't think that scenario will happen. I don't think Pat Narduzzi got Derek Kyler, the transfer quarterback from Dartmouth, as an insurance policy. Yes, but not an insurance policy in case one of the 2 quarterbacks ahead of him leaves, but as an insurance policy because something could happen to one of those 2 quarterbacks, and now you need a backup, and you would prefer to have one with more experience than Nate Yarnell has. I think that's the insurance policy. Let's scroll through a few more questions here. Brock Madonic says, even after landing 3 defensive backs this past weekend, do you still like Pitt's chances with Antonio Robinson, Braden Marshall, and Jermaine Matthews? It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, Robinson and Marshall, I think, are both 4-star prospects, right? And Matthews just picked up an offer from Ohio State last week, so that's going to make that a real challenge to go against Ohio State. That's always the case. We'll have to see. For me, as the official visit weekend gets closer, things kind of come into focus a little bit more with who these guys are and where they stand and where they're leaning and what Pitt's chances are. Same thing. Brock follows up and says, are you optimistic about Pitt landing the Harris twins, Michael and Andrew? Pitt hasn't landed a prominent linebacker recruit in a while. I would say Bengali Kamara and Solomon DeShields were prominent linebacker recruits, but your point stands. They need playmakers and impact players there, particularly in the younger ranks, to kind of refill. And the Harris twins, Michael and Andrew from Florida, both look really, really good. As athletic linebackers who can really run and also hit pretty well too. So, what are Pitt's chances with all those guys? It's tough to say because they've all there've been official visits this past weekend. These guys are all going to take more official visits this coming weekend. Before they get to Pitt, they'll take official visits after that. It's a lot up in the air. Some guys will decide to commit. Some guys will still be hanging around. Some guys will change their visit plans. I don't have a great feel on those guys just yet. We'll see as it gets closer. Josh Newark says, I found it very interesting but appropriate and impactful that Pat Narduzzi tweeted about Aaron Donald's renegotiated contract, meaning that guys that come to Pitt end up getting paid in the NFL. Yeah, I guess I would say that if you are the coach of a team and one of your team's former players is the, consensus, if not unanimous, best defensive player in the NFL, one of the best overall players in the NFL, and one of the best defensive players in NFL history, and you just got the largest contract in NFL history for a non-quarterback, I would say you need to tout that. You need to put that out there, and you need to promote that as much as you can because it's Pitt. Everything is geared toward making sure these kids are always thinking about Pitt. You want Pitt to be a prominent school in these kids' recruitment so that they're always thinking about it. They're always seeing something that makes them think Pitt, 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 whatever it is, because the moment that you stop doing that is the moment you fall out of mind a little bit. And when you fall out of mind, you start slipping in recruitment. That's how it works in recruiting. And so you need to stay in their minds. And so when something like that happens, you need to hammer it so that these guys not only are thinking about Pitt every time you send them a DM or put out a tweet with a graphic like that, but if you do it well enough, it gets to the point where every time they see Aaron Donald, they're thinking Pitt, 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 Pitt. That's the key. And then when they start thinking about their visits or somebody says, well, what schools are you looking at? What schools do you talk to most? Pitt's one of the first they mention because Pitt's one of the ones at the forefront of their minds. That's where you need to be. And so when something like that happens, you better believe you hit them over the head with it as much as you possibly can. Vincent Calfo says, will any defensive linemen that didn't play last year crack the rotation, like Nikai Johnson, Elliott Donald, Dorian Ford? I think Elliott Donald will have a chance at defensive tackle. I think the depth is pretty strong at defensive end. It's going to be tough for Nikai Johnson to get out there. But I think at defensive tackle, a guy like Elliott Donald might have a chance to see the field if he can make plays. I think they have a lot of guys, a lot of veteran guys at defensive tackle, but I think they need playmakers. And if Elliott Donald shows that he can be a playmaker, I think he'll get on the field. But at defensive end, I mean, they've got Haba Baldonado, and they've got John Morgan, and they've got Deslin Alexandra, and they've got Dayon Hayes. I mean, that top four, good luck finding a snap with those guys. Good luck finding a snap among those four guys. Nikai Johnson and the rest are just going to be battling to try and get on the field. Let's see. Last one from Brock Madonic. What about the defensive lineman from Maryland, Desmond Umeozulu? Do you like Pitt's chances there? I mean, he's one of the best defensive line prospects in the country. He's one of the best defensive ends in the country. He's got a ton of offers. He has options. To go back to what we were saying before, he has options, and that's going to be a challenge. But they're getting him on campus for an official visit, and that's the first step. You get him here, you work on him, and you try and make an impact, and see what you can do. All right, I know what we're going to do. We're going to keep doing these shows every Wednesday night right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a huge boost to us. Friday, we'll have a new conversation podcast, a new conversation video interview for you that we can that I'm really looking forward to. I think you're going to enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it. I know I did. We'll release that on Friday morning again on our YouTube channel, and then every Monday morning we'll have the weekend recap. Just a rundown of everything you need to know from the weekend. You're going into work on Monday, or you're at work on Monday, and you're like, wait, did I forget something that happened on Saturday or something? Well, we'll run it down for you in like a half hour or less. We'll get you up to speed on everything you need to know about, so you can impress all your coworkers with all your knowledge of Pitt recruiting information. And then, of course, if you really want to know everything, stay tuned at Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet: football, basketball, recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, message boards, where we have these kinds of conversations all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Make sure you check it out. We'd love to have you join the conversation just like you joined it tonight. So thanks to everybody who came out for the live stream tonight. Thanks to everybody who put their comments and questions into the live stream. It's a lot of fun to do this every week. I appreciate everybody who contributes and participates. I enjoy it. I hope you do too. And so we will be back again. We'll have another live show next Wednesday night at 8:30 right here on our YouTube channel. So subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'll know when we go live. You'll know when we post new videos on Mondays and Fridays and everything else in between. You don't want to miss a thing. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate it. And we will talk to you again next week. So have a great rest of the week. Have a great weekend. And we'll see you next Wednesday.